Good evening, Cedar Falls, and welcome to our regular City Council meeting for Tuesday, September 7th, 2021. I'll now call this meeting to order with a roll call from Madam Clerk.
Miller?
Here.
DeBoer?
Here.
Cruz?
Here.
Harding?
Here.
Dara?
Here.
Sires?
Here.
Dunn?
Here.
All members present, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes from August 16th?
So moved. Second. So moved.
Motion and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That does pass. Madam Clerk, do we have any agenda revisions tonight?
I have no agenda revisions, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. First, going into special presentations, I have a proclamation I'd like to read from, it's item 3, recognizing September 17th through 23rd, 2021 as Constitution Week, and I have two guests with us tonight.
May I
There we are. So we have Barb Gregerson from Daughters of the American Revolution and also local scout Carson Wirtz to join us this evening. Carson will start us off tonight with a quick item on the Constitution and reading our preamble. So the floor is yours, Carson.
Thank you. Thank you, council members and Mayor Green, for having me. The Constitution of the United States established America's national government and fundamental laws and guaranteed certain basic rights for its citizens. It was signed on September 17, 1787 by delegates to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. Under America's first governing document, the Articles of Confederation, the national government was weak and states operated like independent countries. At the 1787 convention, delegates devised a plan for stronger federal government with three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial, along with a system of checks and balances to ensure no single branch would have too much power. In the 234 years since the Constitution was created, America has stretched across an entire continent, and its population and economy have expanded more than the document's framers likely ever could have envisioned. Through the changes, the Constitution has endured and adapted. The framers of the Constitution wrote the preamble, a single sentence, to succinctly explain the purpose of the Constitution. The preamble reads, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America."
Thank you, Carson. And I'll read the proclamation tonight first. And it says, Constitution Week, September 17th through 23rd, 2021. Whereas September 17th, 2021 marks the 234th anniversary of the drafting of the Constitution of the United States of America by 55 delegates to the 1787 Constitutional Convention. And whereas the U.S. Constitution defined for our nation the twin axioms of basic human equality and the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And whereas the U.S. Constitution, as the guardian of our liberties, embodies the principles of limited government in a republic dedicated to rule by law. And whereas the aims of Constitution Week are to emphasize citizens' responsibilities for protecting and defending the Constitution, to inform people that the Constitution is the basis for America's great heritage and the foundation for our way of life, and encourage the study of the historical events that led to the framing of the Constitution in September 1787. And whereas it is fitting and proper to annually accord official recognition to this magnificent document and its memorable anniversary, as well as to the patriotic celebrations and educational activities which will commemorate the occasion by the Daughters of the American Revolution and other civic-minded groups. Now, therefore, I, Mayor Robert M. Green, City of Cedar Falls, do hereby proclaim the week of September 17th to 23rd as Constitution Week in the City of Cedar Falls. And I encourage citizens to reaffirm the ideals of the Constitution's authors through personal study and understanding of constitutional principles, and by vigilantly working to uphold the constitutional protections guaranteed to all Americans. Signed this 27th day of August 2021, Mayor Robert M. Green. So here now, I would like to turn it over to Barbara with the Daughters of the American Revolution for some comments as well.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your comments on the Constitution. The aims of the celebration, by the way, this is one of the least known of the national observations. The aims of this celebration are really threefold. First, to emphasize the citizens' responsibilities for protecting and defending the Constitution and preserving it for posterity. Second, to inform the people that the Constitution is the basis for America's great heritage and the foundation of our way of life. And third, to encourage the study of historical events which led to the framing of the Constitution of the America in September of 1787. Under the Constitution, the United States of America functions as a republic. It is the oldest document still in active use that outlines the self-government of a people. This landmark idea that people had the inalienable right as individuals to be free and live their lives under their own governance was the impetus of the American Revolution. Today, the Constitution stands as an icon of the freedom for people around the world. The Daughters of the American Revolution has served America for 131 years. Each one of the daughters have traced their lineage back to a patriot that served sometime during that revolutionary period. My particular patriot served in 1777 in the Massachusetts militia. He died in 1801, and my sister and I have honored his grave in Western Massachusetts. We've actually visited his grave. The DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution, is the largest women's patriotic organization in the world. The Cedar Falls chapter celebrated our 120th anniversary in 2020. There are over 1 million members in more than 3,000 chapters in all 50 states and 13 foreign countries. The DIR has long promoted patriotism through commemorative celebrations, memorials, scholarships, and activities for children and adults, plus programs for new immigrants. We thank you for this opportunity to shine a spotlight on this important event in American history. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gregerson. And this is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for coming tonight, Carson. Carson's family. And in the interest of time, I'll just have one proclamation I'll want to read. And that is for Suicide Prevention and Recovery Week, which is September 5th through 11th, 2021. So this week. Whereas the week of September 5th to 11th, 2021 is National Suicide Prevention Week, and September 2021 is National Recovery Month, when millions of people around the world join their voices to share a message of hope and healing, particularly in these challenging times. And whereas these observances are united in raising awareness that prevention is possible, treatment is effective, and recovery is achievable. And whereas Cedar Falls residents should be aware of and feel confident in accessing high-quality prevention, support, rehabilitation, and treatment services that lead to recovery and a healthy lifestyle. And whereas the Cedar Valley Coalition for Suicide Prevention and Support and the University of Northern Iowa Counseling Center encourage residents of all ages to take an active role in suicide prevention and to promote mental health and wellness for their families, loved ones, friends, neighbors, and coworkers. Now, therefore, I, Mayor Robert M. Green, proclaim the week of September 5th to 11th, 2021 as Suicide Prevention and Recovery Week in the city of Cedar Falls, and I encourage all residents to take advantage of resources and programs which address suicidal ideation, recognition of concerning signs in others, and engaging positively with those in crisis to help build hope, restore self-sufficiency, and to help those suffering from suicidal ideation to truly believe that life is precious and worth living. Signed this 27th day of August 2021, Mayor Robert M. Green. So with that, it'll turn us over to our next part of the agenda, which is public forum. Speakers will have one opportunity to speak for up to 5 minutes on topics germane to city business. Does anyone from the gallery wish to speak tonight in public forum? Seeing none. Any on Zoom?
No one on Zoom.
Okay, then I will consider the public forum closed and bring us over to special order of business tonight, which is item 6, public hearing on proposed amendments to Chapter 26 zoning of the Code of Ordinance relative to establishing the CD/DT Downtown Character District. Now, I have one comment for tonight, or question. It was requested by Ms. Howard if we might consider both 6 and 7 together in the public hearing because some of the topics for what will move over to both. Would council object to having both discussions at once? Okay, so I will consider that the public hearing for both item 6 and item 7. And item 7 is a public hearing on the proposed rezoning of all property within the defined boundaries of the Downtown Character District from current zoning districts and placing the same in the CD/DT Downtown Character District. So is there a motion, or excuse me, is there a motion to receive proof and publication for the notice of hearing for both items?
So move.
Second.
Motion and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Madam Clerk, do we have any written communications filed with both items?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have 3 written communications. 2 were included in the packet, and of course, 1 was placed before the council at the dais.
Okay, yes. So we did receive the one from A-Line from Ben Stroh this afternoon, and that should be on your chairs. So starting us off tonight on the staff side, we have Karen Howard and Mary Madden, and that's to discuss the 2 items before us tonight. So Ms. Howard, would you like to start us off here?
Okay, I just wanted to first say thank you to Mary Madden for being here in person this evening. I know that you've seen her on Zoom a number of times, so we welcome her to Cedar Falls today. Just to start off, just to remind council and the community of the project study area boundaries. This is a project that has 2 phases. One was to review what we have in the downtown and create a vision for the future of downtown. And the second phase is to craft zoning regulations to realize that vision. As the council knows, you set project priorities for this project back in April of 2019. And the first number of these project priorities, of course, had to do with that visioning process and the community outreach that we did all throughout 2019 for that visioning process. You can see toward the end here, we're talking about encouraging economic development based on that adopted vision, and then establishing clear and objective zoning standards to achieve the adopted community vision. Here's a more interesting map of the downtown study area that shows the yellow boundary here is the study area boundary, but it has the existing zoning that we have, so quite a collection of different zoning designations in the downtown area. We chose this boundary because it had a lot of our older zoning designations that were not our low intensity residential neighborhoods, but the higher intensity, either multifamily, industrial, or commercial zoning designations, in addition to the central business district overlay. The current zoning has a number of different, as you said, the traditional zones were established about 50 years ago, back in 1970, and they're really crafted as traditional zoning districts. At the time, it's kind of a one-size-fits-all. They're not really based on the existing neighborhood context in the downtown area. They have a basic set of zoning standards like many communities with a traditional zoning. It's building setbacks, building height, lot area requirements, some parking standards, and often older zoning codes have a laundry list of sometimes outdated land uses that are allowed, and it's hard to update those over time. So there have been numerous amendments over the years to address issues that we've come across And so we have sort of a patchwork of zoning amendments in the ordinance over time. One of the major ones is the adoption of the Central Business District overlay. This covers the traditional part of the downtown area because the C3 district that's the underlying zone really conflicts with our traditional Main Street commercial. If you look at the requirements of the C3 district, they're really counter and conflict with what we have said that we desire to be preserved on the Main Street. There's a layer of additional standards with this overlay. However, we've run into some trouble in the past because some of these standards are fairly vague and subjective, which has left open things for debate and interpretation and caused some projects to be extended review process. So the vision plan was adopted by the City Council then in November 2019 and adopted a number of different goals for that plan. You can find in the vision plan. So we'll just go through some of those because those are really what guided us as we drafted the new zoning. Farrell Madden took the vision plan then and looked at the goals that came up within the community and said, okay, how are we going to create a new zoning code to achieve these goals? So the first one is to preserve the historic Main Street character of the parkade and expand that, what is really the beloved part of downtown, to some other areas surrounding the parkade. And then to foster pedestrian-oriented streets and public spaces. We want to line the public streets with active building facades and add street trees. These were things mentioned by the community in that visioning process. And then encourage economic development. We want to preserve, of course, what's best about downtown on the Main Street and some of the surrounding areas in the neighborhoods, and then encourage infill that is consistent with the context in the vision that's been adopted. And then also in the surrounding neighborhoods downtown, to provide a variety of housing options for all ages. As you know, we have an aging baby boomers, and we also have a millennial generation that's the largest generation currently in the United States. Both of those generations either downsizing or desiring to live in more urban context. So some people do want to live in the mixed-use buildings downtown. So we're trying to continue to encourage that, but also then to encourage living opportunities and options in the surrounding neighborhoods for the many different generations that want to live close to downtown and all the amenities that it has to provide. These different housing types that were identified both in the vision plan and that we tried to code into the new code. Here's a cottage court, duplexes, and we can see we already have some duplexes in many of these neighborhoods downtown that fit right into the scale. Townhomes that fit into the scale of a lower scale neighborhood. Here's some traditional townhomes that are on Main Street in Cedar Falls. Small apartment buildings. And a little bit larger apartment buildings, but they still kind of fit into the context of our downtown. Also, we wanted to focus on what we don't want in the downtown, so try to prevent the things. So we've drafted some code provisions to prevent blank walls, for example. Streets that are unpleasant places to walk, standards that will require screening of mechanical equipment, placement of those kinds of things in the proper location so that we maintain the walkability of our streets. And also out in the neighborhoods to avoid blank walls and buildings not oriented to the street. This type of infill development really gives higher density development a bad name and creates some problems for adjacent houses that would be near this, and also for the people that live in it. There's not even a door that faces the street. So want to try to provide higher density options in the neighborhood, but that fit in. And then another thing to avoid is, of course, buildings that are out of scale with the neighborhood. Some of our existing R3 and R4 districts don't have any controls over the scale of the buildings. They have height limits, but they don't have width limits. So you could have a whole half block that's torn down in a larger apartment building. And then, of course, poorly placed parking makes for really unpleasant streets. Of course, parking is important, but we want it in the proper place so that we maintain the streets for people and the cars parked in the appropriate locations. So I'm going to hand this over to Mary now to kind of go through some of the specifics of the zoning tools that were crafted in the new code. But just to emphasize that these were all items that were listed in the vision plan as goals for our new code. So I'm going to hand this over to Mary, along with the microphone here.
Thank you, Karen. One of the tasks, as Karen highlighted with the images, is when we came through the vision plan, is how do you draft new standards that clearly require and allow the type of development that you want to have and prevent the type of development that you don't want to see, but still allow a great range of flexibility for individual property owners, developers, architects to design and build the type of projects that you would like. We approached this building on the vision plan, understanding what the current zoning allowed, what people liked, what they didn't want to see, and worked through a series of types of standards, tried to make them as clear and objective as possible. So as Karen highlighted, the current CBD overlay does a lot of good for downtown today, but it still has a lot of subjectivity in it, so projects get bogged down as people debate paint colors and things like that, that maybe isn't the best way for the council or the planning commission to spend their time. Trying to look at the context as it varies around in the core of downtown and going out to the adjacent neighborhoods. Work to modernize your code. As Karen highlighted, your code is about 50 years old. Codes today, thanks to computers and our understanding of urban design principles, are a lot more graphic, include illustrations, diagrams, photos to make them more user-friendly for people who are not trained as urban planners professionally. We also worked through the process of how projects are reviewed and developed today, approved for development. And we went through and looked at the way your land uses are currently categorized and really tried to simplify those and make it a little more logical for people to understand what's permitted and what's not permitted. As she said, we've been here a few times presenting over the last year and a half remotely with the P&Z and with you all, and kind of walk through what is in the draft code. The standards are slightly different than what the existing code is, but they emphasize many of the same things you currently regulate, but it just prioritizes them differently. So the standards address the building form, how big buildings can be, where they sit on the lot, how they're oriented to the street. It does include some simple architectural standards, not trying to be style specific, but making sure that you get quality design and things that seem like common sense, like doors and windows on the street, just that level of detail. Public realm standards, oftentimes zoning doesn't address, but that's really dealing with how the buildings relate to the street, what happens between the curb and the front of the buildings, parking and loading, as I know you all are very familiar with, and then building functions, again, taking a look at what uses are permitted and in which areas. One of the most important things we really looked at when we went through the vision plan, during that time we developed something called a character areas map and tried to look at how the different areas, from the parkade to the areas adjacent to the parkade to the neighborhoods, how those relate to each other and how the development standards should differ. So this page is from the draft code, and it identifies, the parkade is one thing, Washington Street is a different character. Clay, as you move west, the streets get a little bit different between not just with the land uses allowed, but actually the character of the buildings. How, are they mixed use? Are they single use? Are they all residential? And trying to deal with that context. In particular, the code includes something called neighborhood manners that is important for people to understand when you're dealing with a compact mixed-use area. How do the transitions between the different parcels and the uses and the different scales get implemented. So that's something we looked at very carefully as you move from the core of downtown to the neighborhoods. How do you make sure existing homes are protected from larger buildings shadowing over them? Each one of these character areas or frontage types in the downtown code has a layout with a graphic diagram that identifies specific locations on the parcel, defines terms, and then goes through very specific standards with objective, measurable standards for development in those areas. As I just mentioned, through the code, there are a series of diagrams, photo illustrations, which I should highlight. The photos are to provide intent. They are not regulatory, but it's to help people understand, oh, this is the type of development that these standards could produce in this area or another area. We did work through your current process. We talked to current developers and architects to have an understanding. We talked with staff of how projects get developed, how do they get reviewed now, what's clear, what's not clear, what doesn't work. So the process has been streamlined and has some clear standards that should be better for the city, for the staff, and for developers, and also for surrounding neighbors to insert a little bit more certainty into the process. It also has some clear standards for people who are just slightly rehabbing or remodeling existing buildings, so only a certain level of the standards would apply for those projects, as well as there are some minor adjustments that can be administered if someone runs into a problem that they can't meet the code based on some unique site condition or some construction problem. There is a way to give them a minor adjustment without going to the Board of Appeals process. The code also has greatly streamlined the use categories to broad categories and identifying which areas they are permitted in. There's a lot fewer categories than you currently have. So the categories are not just the uses, they may also have additional performance standards related to specific uses. There are examples and things that are excluded within each of the categories, and there's a process for staff to be able to interpret, if a new use comes online. We have a lot of uses today that, were not in the code from 1970, and so there needs to be a way for staff to make a determination as they go through that process. For the downtown character district, this simple table is in the code that has been drafted. And I believe Karen's going to talk through the process overall.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back over the process that we did follow for the adoption of the code. As you know, Farrell Madden and Community Recode did draft the code, and we had extensive internal staff review and back and forth to make sure that it was achieving what we had set out to do. And then, as you recall, back in the end of last year in 2020 and the beginning part of 2021, we sat down with the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Community Main Street, and with the council at work sessions to go over what we had proposed as the process for review of the new code and how it was going to run through that process, so everybody was familiar before we started down that road. We started off then releasing the draft code at the Planning and Zoning Commission in February of this year with a presentation from Farrell Madden. That was then available. That draft was available on our cedarfalls.com webpage. It was promoted widely on social media through the Currents, individual property mailers to all property owners in the area. It was on TV news, and it was in the newspaper. Following that, then, there were 3 work sessions offered to development professionals, realtors, architects, developers, engineering professionals, people that had been involved in the vision plan that we wanted to revisit with to make sure they felt like it was achieving what we had set out to do, and ask if their advice on any changes they thought should be made. We had a work session with Community Main Street in March to go over the code to see if they had any questions or concerns. There were 4 Planning and Zoning Commission work sessions in February and March to go over each section of the code in detail, allow the commissioners to review those and ask questions. And then we held 3 formal public hearing meetings at the commission level in March and April to formally consider those. Throughout that process, of course, we reached out to the community, and through the correspondence that we had, a number of people did reach out to staff and did attend those meetings to ask questions about what does this mean for my property? How will this code affect it? So we did talk to quite a few people about the new code, and a number of people did request changes, specific changes or consideration of changes to the code. And as you know, we tried to listen to those and put those in a decision matrix so that we could carefully consider those, and the commission reviewed those and reviewed pros and cons for each one of those suggestions, and then made a decision whether that a change should be made or not. Once they got through that decision matrix and we made those changes to the code that they recommended, it was recommended to the council on May 12th. Here's a copy of that decision matrix. I know that the council has received it a number of different times, but just to demonstrate that, each one of these suggestions were considered, and a number of them were very good suggestions and were incorporated into the code. As you know, the council has reviewed it at a committee of the whole meeting, at several work sessions in June, and another committee of the whole meeting. The parking standards were discussed at 2 different meetings because there was quite a bit of questions and concerns about that. And of course, here we are today at the public hearing. Of course, the next steps would be to hold the meetings and consider adoption of the code. And of course, with a project of this size, of course, once it's adopted, to give that code a chance to work. And of course, no code is perfect. So of course, with a project this size, we would want to revisit it after a period of time to make any adjustments that are needed. With that, I would like to just continue to move on per the mayor's direction here to consider that rezoning of property. So once the new code is in place, if the code is adopted, of course, the next step would be to rezone all the properties in the study area to the new designation, which is CDDT, Character District Downtown. That would be adopting the downtown regulating plan as then the new zoning map for this area. We did want to point out that changing the zoning does not require anyone to change how they are using their property currently. It just is to address when people want to make changes to their property. That's the way zoning works. Once again, this is that same map with the underlying zoning districts. And then here's the new regulating plan for the downtown character district. It has new frontage designations that are coded right to the streets to give more context. The storefront, urban general 2, neighborhood medium, and neighborhood small would then replace all the existing zoning districts in the area. And I'm not going to go through the details of each one of these, but I have them on the slide in case there are questions about how these are different from the current zoning, and just wanted to note a few things. The urban general is the area that's the dark orange area that surrounds the parkade. So the areas that on the block surrounding the downtown. So it's covered mostly by the C3 district, some C2 district in that area. The building height in the new code does address building height and sets a limit at 4 stories. And the current code, the C3 district, allows 15 plus stories. With the overlay, the width and the height of the adjacent buildings, it says it shall be considered. So that's been a bit of a problem when new projects come forward. There's a lot of debate on how tall the buildings should be. I'm not going to go through all these standards here, but they are to address a lot of the things that Mary had discussed before, as far as blank building walls, making sure there's entrances, a mix of uses are allowed, just like they are currently in the downtown. The urban general 2, then, as you go further out from the downtown, the transition into the neighborhoods, they cover these are basic urban building forms. They're less intense than the urban general. There's a 2 to 3 story height, 42 feet maximum. Just to note, the C1 zoning in this area allows only 2 stories currently, and the C2 allows 3 stories. So it's similar, but a lot of the C1 zoned areas will now allow 3 stories with this new zoning. The regulated building line means sort of like the setback line, except it's a maximum. So you build the building to that line. You can see here the C1 district, anybody that's got C1, the front setback is 25 feet. So it does provide quite a bit more flexibility for new development to occur fairly close to the sidewalk then. The other thing to note is that C1 and C2 do not allow residential uses on the ground floor. And that's created some problems for a few property owners that have houses that had some commercial use in it, and now they want to change it back to residential, but the current zoning does not allow them to do that because it's a commercial zone. The new zoning will allow both residential and commercial uses, so would acknowledge some of those homes that have been changed into offices. The storefront frontage is reserved for the main parkade area that's in the downtown from 1st to 6th Street along Main Street. It's a subset set of the urban general, so it has a lot of the same standards, but it has a little bit higher window coverage, a little bit more of the building coverage along the street, and it does address that height standard again. It does allow a mix of uses, but reserves that ground floor for retail as the main part of downtown. The neighborhood medium, as you move out here, the outline in black is just on this slide. It's not on the regulating plan, but just to highlight the area where it's designated as neighborhood medium. This area is to allow a variety of housing types, the missing middle housing types that we discussed before. It has a height limit between 1 and 3 stories. The current R3 and R4 zoning designations in these areas allow 3 stories. So that's a very similar scale. But what it does do is it does have a maximum building width. So it does control the width of the building, so the scale in the sense of how much it could fit on the lot and how it relates to the neighbors. So if you have a single family house and then have a small apartment building, they'll at least be a similar scale and fit in. They, of course, require windows and porches to address the street and have a new open space requirement, so there's assured some usable open space on every lot. We did make a change at the Planning and Zoning Commission. The commission considered a number of requests where there are existing commercial businesses in areas that were zoned C1, along Main, what's that? R3 and R4. Also allows some offices. So the code allows those commercial uses to continue as conforming uses so that they can expand, they can continue to operate without any implication for those uses. But this area wouldn't allow any new commercial uses in the future. In the neighborhood small area, this is the area largely to the west of downtown in the Overman Park neighborhood. This is the smallest then designation, so height limits are limited to 2 stories in this area to reflect the desire to kind of preserve the scale of the homes in that area. It should be noted the R3 and the R4 zoning that's currently in this area allow 3 stories or 45 feet, so quite a bit larger than most of the homes in the area. Once again, all the same kinds of standards that we applied in the other neighborhood area to ensure that those buildings fit in. I have on the last 2 slides here an overlay of the current zoning with with the new regulating plan overlaid. The council did receive this in your initial packet. It's kind of a useful tool in case there are questions that come up at the hearing tonight, and we can refer to this map if needed. With that, I just entertain any questions that the council has.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Howard. So with this being the public hearing, our next section in here would be public comments on the item. And we will consider both public comments for item 6 and item 7 together. So if anyone from the gallery would like to start us off with public comment, you're welcome to raise your hand and come to the podium. Yes, Mary Jane McCollum, come forward, please. Name and address for the record, please.
Mary Jane McCollum, 807 West 2nd. I've been here before, and one of the issues that always comes up for me is parking, and I didn't hear that being addressed here. Since I'm on the Rental Housing Appeals Board, parking is always an issue, and I was at the visioning meetings, all the charrettes. I listened to people time after time repeat the concerns about parking. I've looked at the map that's on the 92-page, I don't know what to call it, the form, I guess, from Farrell Madden that talks about neighborhoods, small condos or townhouses, I'm not sure what we're calling them, but a lot of them are on lots that are very small, and I don't know where the parking's going to be, but I do know that things that were said at some of these meetings had to do with not having parking on flat surfaces, not having parking on street level. And I look at the 2 lots that are behind the new bank over here, and those are fairly small lots. And if someone were to put up a townhouse or a building there, I'm not quite sure where the parking would be. And it might end up like down by Hertz Donuts, where you have people parking in the street. And that becomes then a city problem. I have a house 5 blocks west of here, and one of the issues I see during Sturgis is the parking is, anybody that's been at Sturgis knows what I'm talking about. This whole area is park solid. And if you don't have parking for these residences, people are going to move out into the residential area a block away or 2 blocks away, and it's going to become a problem for other people. And I used to own property on College Hill, and it was a problem there, even though my housing had parking off-street. It was still a problem in the neighborhood because people parked in the street. And I had neighbors across the street from me who had issues with my tenants parking in the street. And I said, I provide parking, but I cannot patrol it all the time. And that just becomes an additional problem. And it's going to be a problem downtown. We keep talking about using Viking Pump lot. Well, that says that we're having an increased need for more parking downtown. And I'm not seeing that being addressed in this plan. I don't think we're ready to deal with this plan yet until that gets addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McCollum. Other questions, comments from the gallery? Ms. Baer.
Kim Bear, 3815 Union Road in Cedar Falls. And I know I submitted a letter to the council packet, but we did have some questions in regard to that letter. And I met with exec today, so we prepared some additional comments this evening.
For those unfamiliar, this is for College Hill Partners, or excuse me, Community Main Street.
Main Street, sorry. I am the executive director of Community Main Street. I should probably say that. As Community Main Street, we strive to hear, consider, and represent the voices of our varied constituents. At times, those voices can be conflicting, which we all know. Through many, many discussions recently with business owners, property owners, developers, and others in our district, we have heard feedback across the spectrum of this issue. Obviously, we're talking about the parking within the visioning code. We've heard from developers in our district who believe the new code is acceptable based on their experience with current development. We've heard from business owners downtown that are worried that the reduction of the parking requirement will then force tenants into valuable customer spots. Both voices of concern likely hold validity. We understand that no single solution makes all parties happy. Tonight, we share the thoughts of concerns of our downtown constituents for your consideration as the decision makers A lot goes into tough decisions like these, and we will support and embrace the data-informed decisions that are reached. We are always honored to have a representative voice during these occasions and appreciate that we are struggling with issues related to good problems like downtown growth and redevelopment, as opposed to the opposite. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Bear. Any other speakers from the gallery tonight? Yes, Mr. Kittrell, please.
Mark Kittrell, 250 State and River Place developer. A couple of things, and I've been in front of this group a lot of times on this topic, and I want to just maybe make a couple of comments. First of all, I think this plan is very well put together. It's gone through a lot of thoughtful consideration, a lot of input from staff, a lot of great work from consultants, and I think it's interesting that over and over that we get to the discussion where it really comes down into a question of parking. I think they've put a great plan together, and I think we're continuing to hear this question of really, is there a parking problem in downtown? I've been up in front of this group numerous times talking about parking, had a variety of discussions about it. I would tell you, if based on the last time that the group heard this and brought this forward, the question was, is the residential parking too small? And I think it's fair to say 2 of the 4 the development areas still in the downtown that would probably apply most on this are ones that we control. And I would tell you right now, if it is in the wisdom of this group that there needs to be additional parking in those residential areas, I think that's fine. We had good discussion. I think even Karen brought up the last time. I think the market will dictate that there'll be more parking for the residential units than probably even what the code is. I would not have a problem, I'm telling you here, in saying, okay, go ahead and put it to a higher level if that's really what you want to have happen. It's perfectly fine to have somebody have the opportunity to go through P&Z and come before you guys and say it's too much parking and we want a variance. We did that when we were developing in downtown. I think anybody still has that prerogative. So I want to be real clear, because I think there's also been some, miscommunication and some misunderstanding amongst council and a lot of people, that the question also of, is there enough customer parking in downtown? That's a different issue. And I don't buy into the notion, and we've talked about it on a number of occasions, I think the issue of, is there enough customer parking in downtown, is something that this group needs to take up and clearly needs to take up. Councilman Harding, I think you asked exactly the right question the last time that this came up, and they said if the community wishes to have free parking in downtown for customers, then I think it's a fair question to say, okay, how is it going to be paid for then? And if that's as a matter of a bond issue or a general fund kind of thing, we have an election coming up. This is the kind of topic that I think would be absolutely the kind of thing that people ought to be talking about, and we're going to have an opportunity for the public to weigh in on it. Do not miscommunicate or misunderstand that I think this residential parking thing that's being talked about is not the same thing as customer parking that people are asking for businesses in downtown. There are a number of parking lots in downtown that could be expanded to parking ramps if there is a willingness and a desire from citizens and you all to put it in. That's all I have to say on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kittrell. Anyone else in the gallery? Yes, sir. Name and address for the record, please.
Jim Benda, 1816 Valley High Drive, Cedar Falls. I also am a stakeholder in the area, owning 2 properties in the downtown. And it sounds to me like everyone realizes that maybe there's a parking issue here. I'm opposed to your solution to that problem, which is shared parking. I believe that's a violation of private property rights. And I don't think it's fair to put off parking on other properties if you can't park your own. And so I guess I have a couple of questions under this vision plan. that I've addressed, and I still don't have an answer to it. But my first one is, to the council, is how does the rezoning process different under this vision plan? Simon, that's a question for you, maybe.
Please address the chair, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'd like to know how the rezoning process is different under the downtown vision. Can someone answer that for me?
We'll take that up. So can you ask your questions, and then we'll discuss that?
We don't get an answer to the question as we go?
Not immediately, no.
Okay, okay. And so
But
then
I am writing it down, so we.
Okay, okay.
cover it.
And so then is there a parking requirement for new commercial main floor space? And then the next question is, if we are successful in building these buildings and putting in new tenants, if you look at the downtown, it is heavily weighed in food and beverage. So the likelihood is that will continue. Does anyone know what a successful restaurant requires as far as parking? That number is probably 100 or more, because 20 of it is at least staff. So now if you build all this space and you put in 3 new restaurants that don't have a parking requirement, now you're at 300 stalls. Where do those people park? And it's on the street somewhere, but it's probably not next to the venue. I guess those are my biggest questions, is how the process is different. And I guess as council members, your vote tonight will tell us whether you support that new process, which I believe involves heavily staff, and I would like to keep it more where the elected officials make those determinations. And maybe somebody can explain how shared parking is a benefit to an existing owner down there with limited parking. As soon as you redo your building, you're subject to shared parking. If you need those parking stalls at 8:30 at night, what's the solution? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bena. Any other speakers from the gallery? Seeing none, any on Zoom?
We do.
Okay.
Sally Timmer.
Yes, Ms. Timmer, name and address for the record, please.
Hello, I'm Sally Timmer. I live at 203 Tremont Street. I just want to say that as a homeowner in the Oberman Park neighborhood, I am in support of the proposed new zoning code. I think this will keep our downtown moving in the right direction, and I love the proposals for our neighborhood, especially along 2nd Street, to keep our street residential, and the neighborhood manners that are put in place to protect our homes from larger buildings shadowing over us. Some of the other highlights for me are the option to add the ADUs in the neighborhood to increase density and the limits on vinyl siding. These changes will help ensure that new development will fit in with our existing downtown and Oberman Park neighborhood and will have a positive impact on our city.
Thank you, Ms. Timmer. Any other speakers?
No one else has their hand up. Nope.
Okay. So any other in the gallery? Seeing none, then I will consider the public hearing closed, and Mr. Bennett, we will get to your questions. Get back to my sheet. So with the public hearing closed for both of those items, 6 and 7, I'll bring us back to the normal order here, where we are just on item 6 again, which is 6E, passing ordinance amending Chapter 26 zoning and other associated sections of the Code of Ordinances relative to establishing the CDDT Downtown Character District upon its first consideration. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Motion and seconded. We'll open it up for council discussion now, and this could be a lengthy discussion, so I would like to see if we can get those questions answered for Mr. Bender to start out with. So for
Mayor?
Ms. Howard, do you have those questions?
Mayor?
Or is there, yeah.
Point of order. Are we considering 7E as well at the same time, or are we going to do that separate?
We have that as or separate, but I would entertain doing, if you think there's value to it, to do together, but I thought it might be easier to separate it out. Okay. Mr.
We
Rogers
need to
saying so.
separate them out now.
Okay, great. All right, so we will just consider 6 at this point. It's probably going to trickle over a little bit, and there's not much we can do about that. So with that, Ms. Howard, you had the questions from Mr. Benda. Do you need me to repeat those?
So I think the first question was, is the rezoning process different for this new code than it was for any other rezoning? And the answer is no. We follow the same rezoning process for the adoption of the new code and the rezoning of properties as any other rezoning process. It is lengthier because we've had more meetings about this rezoning process than most rezoning requests. All the public hearings, the public hearing notices, their letters to neighbors and property owners, that process is all the same as with any rezoning.
Okay, Councilmember Harding?
Just following up on that, quick question. So if we need to make a change as we go, or something pops up and we can make another change to it as we go, correct? Even before the year is up? Because we're going to revisit the zoning in a year, correct?
Yeah, so that would be taken up like at a goal setting or some special committee of the whole meeting. We could go over how the new code is going. But any change, once you adopt the ordinance, any change would have to go through the same rezoning process that you're going through right now.
So basically where I'm going is, since the original code that we're dealing with was started in 1950, correct? And then along the way,
1970.
1970, that's what I meant, 50 years. But along the way, we've made changes, correct? And so the changes we made along the way were ordinance changes similar to what we're doing tonight. We're just doing a larger chunk and kind of updating. Am I understanding all that correctly?
That's correct. Any kind of change to the zoning ordinance requires Planning and Zoning Commission review, public notice in the paper, and we, as a matter of practice, send out letters to all the property owners in the area.
Okay. Thanks. I just wanted to clarify and make sure.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes,
Just to follow up on Simon's, were those letters sent out to property owners whose zoning is going to be changed? Was that return receipt, or was that just a general mailer that went out to all the people who were affected?
So we did a couple different mailers. The first mailer was when the new code was released. We mailed a postcard to all the property owners in the area, notifying them of the process and the fact that it's being considered. And then we sent a separate formal letter that we send similar to any rezoning in the property, explaining that their property is under consideration for rezoning and how to participate in the process. It included the new regulating plan, map, and information on how to contact to ask any questions about it. That's the same letter that we send out for any rezoning of property.
But there's no way to know that those people got theirs for sure. And how many property owners did that affect? How many letters were sent out?
I don't know the number off the top, but it's all the property in the area received it.
Okay, and then, yes, Councilmember Dewar?
Well, I have a question for clarity. You mentioned neighborhood small or neighborhood medium, and I think those kind of follow R1 and R2 zonings. In what we used to have as R1 and R2, they're now kind of being replaced with this neighborhood small or neighborhood medium. And you mentioned that the purpose was kind of to provide higher density options that fit in, I think was the words that you're using. So would that mean that there'd be higher density than 1 and 2 family homes in what was the one in R1 and R2 areas?
Just to clarify, and we can bring this up on the map here too. Find the.
Well, I'm kind of looking at it in broad, not just the map, because we're talking right now about the code in general, which would mean it could be citywide eventually someday.
Well, what we're considering now is just this area, and then of course each area that we would consider for rezoning, we'd have to consider what's the appropriate zoning for those areas. So the areas right now are really mostly zoned R3 and R4. So they're already zoned multifamily zonings or commercial zonings in the downtown area. There is one block that's north of the elementary school that we included that's R2. But other than that, there's no R2 or R1 in this rezoning area.
Well, that didn't really answer the question. The question was, where there's not currently allowed more density than 1 or 2 family homes, are you now allowing more density?
The R3 and R4 zones already allow apartment buildings, duplexes, single family. It allows that whole range of uses, including some office uses.
But if this code, like I said, if number 7 is where we talk about where the code would be in effect, but the code, if it went to other areas, for example, the College Hill area, there already is a vision area in which you have different small neighborhood and neighborhood mediums, which were the R1 and R2. So my question is, would they then be allowed to have more density than what current code allows?
So if the new code for those areas is developed, that would be under debate on what we should allow. But that's not what's under it. We won't necessarily take this code and apply it, just like we don't want, like the current zoning we said is one size fits all. The idea behind this code is that it should fit the context of the neighborhood. So if the context of the College Hill neighborhood is different, and we're talking about R1 and R2 zoned areas, then the question there is what is appropriate for those areas? And at that point in time, when we consider those areas, those are the questions we'll have to ask ourselves. Should we allow these other housing types in those particular areas? And the answer may be no. But that's really not what's being debated here tonight.
So to continue on with Mr. Benda's questions, number 2 was an explanation, I guess, not really a question, but an explanation of what parking means for commercial main floor space. Did I capture that sense? Okay.
Is there a requirement for parking on a main floor
Okay.
space?
Okay.
There is currently not a requirement on the main floor space for retail and commercial in the commercial space. That's similar to what it is today.
Okay. And then question 3 was, my scribble here. Does anyone know what a successful restaurant requires for parking? Has that kind of research been done at all for this, or any sense? Is that a question you'd even want to tackle?
Well, there are all sorts of numbers that you could hear, and a lot of it depends on context. If your expectation is every person is coming to the restaurant, one person, one car, then the numbers that Mr. Benda offered up are probably accurate. If you're working in an area like a downtown context where the expectation is that people will be getting there by a variety of modes of transportation, either because they live right upstairs or they live 3 or 4 blocks away, or they'll stay after work, the numbers are much lower. There is a lot of research that's been done on this subject. There's a professor from UCLA who's written a giant book called The High Cost of Free Parking, and he talks about where the parking numbers come from. There's some science and there's a whole lot of guesswork. So I wouldn't venture to predict a popular restaurant may need more, a less popular restaurant may not need much at all. How much space is in the restaurant? There's so many variables that it would be foolish to try to give you an absolute number.
Sure.
But I think that's one of the reasons that the whole vision plan talked about creating a park once environment. So parking could be used at different times of the day, and so you don't have everybody providing their own parking that sits there empty when they are closed.
Okay. And maybe that kind of ties into the next question you had was, how is shared parking a benefit to an existing owner? Yes, it's how is shared parking a benefit to an existing owner? Is that correct? Okay.
For those of you who were in attendance last month, this may be a little repetitive, but one of the goals with shared parking, as I just alluded to, is currently, as people mentioned here, existing businesses, if they feel like they don't have enough parking for their customers currently, having shared parking would mean that if someone is building new and building new parking, some small portion of that parking would be added to the publicly available pool. It doesn't mean that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that parking, as we've drafted it, doesn't have to be available. It means that some portion of different days of the week, that parking could be publicly available. Again, from the parking study that you all had done before we started the Downtown Vision Plan, it was identified that you have a certain amount of public parking and that you have a considerable amount of privately owned parking that at certain hours of the day sits underutilized. And so the question is, in addition to Mr. Kittrell's point of, is the city ready to actually provide more parking free to the public? Is there some other way to increase the publicly available pool of parking? And so we were tasked with exploring a mechanism to help you achieve that. And the numbers in the proposal for shared parking available at some portion of the day was what we ended up with in the draft code.
And is the idea there that for shared parking, you'd try to have compatible uses where it'd be like an office during the daytime and then shift it over to restaurant use in the evening, so they're not butting heads?
Right.
Okay.
Or offices that are busy during the week, but maybe their parking is available nights and weekends, or residential units that maybe they're gone all day, their parking might be available during the day for people going to buy popcorn on the parquet. The idea is you have a finite amount of land in downtown. Everybody we've talked to loves downtown Cedar Falls. So how can you maximize that very finite resource that you have? And parking takes up a lot of land area. I didn't mention this before, the question on restaurants. When you start talking about how much parking you need, if you use some of the typical numbers for suburban pad site restaurants, you end up requiring restaurants to have more space for parking than they actually have inside the restaurant. So at some point, you have to start thinking, okay, what is a more logical way to handle this, especially if we have a really compact mixed-use area?
Okay, thank you. And before we get to Councilor Harding, is anyone else who hasn't spoken or had questions yet want to add in? Councilmember Cruz? And then we'll get to you, Simon.
Thank you. I'm curious, we have this in front of us to approve the zoning change, but I'm assuming we're going to have another lengthy discussion about the actual parking requirements, because we never finished that at the last committee meeting, because that would make a difference in what ultimately gets developed downtown.
If I recall right, that was motioned but not moved forward on.
Yeah, there was no
wasn't a
consensus.
council consensus.
There was no,
desired
that was
change.
just, we just stopped, we ran out of time and we stopped talking. So the half a parking spot or the shared parking or distance parking, I forget the term, 600 feet away, we never finished elaborating on that at all. That wasn't, because, I'm curious, because we're focusing on, and Karen said this, that we're just changing the zoning. We're not talking about some R1 in a different part of town, but we're going down the proverbial slippery slope. We're going to approve, this thing here with the color scheme and the labels, neighborhood medium, neighborhood small, and all the others. That what's the ultimate parking requirement? Because we haven't decided that yet. We haven't finished debating that yet. So if the vote tonight is approving what was said in the parking proposal, I would be definitely against that. We didn't finish that part. And I guess I'm not convinced, when this rolls into the other parts of town, is there going to be a neighborhood tiny area labeled for R1? Or what do the R1 people want single-family homes and they want maybe an acre lot or whatever their R1 is. So there's a lot of different variety of housing in town, some from the 1800s up to the modern homes. And one of the other items that sticks out in my mind is the required building line for housing. And that's not so relevant in this area where there's not that much probably new development, but you're telling a homeowner you have to park up to this, build your property right at this line. You can't have a longer setback and have a water feature in your front yard or whatever you want to do. Or there might be existing trees when you tear down an old house, but you got to take down these trees to go up to this required building line. I mean, that's a element that I would not be in favor of. So my question is, I said a lot there. If we're just approving the zoning change, or does that automatically roll down into what was proposed for the downtown? I mean, where are we at with that?
So the first item on the agenda is the text amendments to the zoning ordinance, which includes the parking requirements and the form standards in the code. The second item on the agenda is, if the code doesn't pass, of course, you can't rezone property to that zoning designation. So that's why they have to be voted on separately as separate items.
And Ms. Howard, there was a question that he'd had about like the tiny neighborhoods, or I was thinking the reverse. If you found that, say in 20, 30 years, you wanted to increase the intensity in a certain part because your city's growing, what's the mechanism for doing that? Do you then add on like an urban general 3, or what does that look like? Or are we
Mary,
limited
you
to
wanna-
basically what we have in the code now?
I would like to answer that question and perhaps answer, I think, one other question that Councilman Cruz raised, and I would like to clarify his concern about the required building line. We talked about this not being one size fits all, and Karen mentioned that the regulating plan shows those. So, in fact, in the medium small neighborhoods, the required building lines are not the same as downtown. They're not right at the back of the sidewalk. They actually were drafted based on where the existing houses sit today. So one of the things about looking at this is trying to be respectful of the existing context. So I want to make sure no one thinks that this is saying the houses around Overman Park suddenly have to sit within 5 feet of the back of the sidewalk. In fact, they still have to that context that's there. So that is a really important thing. I want to make sure there's no confusion about that. So the other question about, if the area was going to grow more, there could be a couple of different ways, or if you were going to rezone different parts of the city. One of the reasons, we went through the visioning process for downtown and for College Hill was trying to identify what the future vision is for those areas. So, our task was to try to set the new zoning base. How could we implement that vision? So if your question related back to downtown, there could be a couple of different ways, I think, to do that, which would be you could do a text amendment that says, this is all hypothetical into the future. You could, I believe, say urban general, the height is now going to be 8 stories as opposed to 4 stories. So you could do it that way, I believe, or you could come up with a new form standard that you want to say, wow, this one area over here, we really want to have 30-story buildings, and you could adjust, It would be a type of rezoning, and the question is, would it be a map amendment or a text amendment? But it could be handled in either way.
Okay.
But I would advocate strongly that it be tied to some kind of public community visioning process where people in Cedar Falls say, yes, our expectation is that this area should be intensely redeveloped or developed if it's a new greenfield area that you all see as a high growth area and you want it to develop that way.
Mm-hmm.
But it should, zoning ultimately should be an implementing tool for the planning work that the city's undertaken.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Harding, you had a question?
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to finish
You need to
my
follow
line of discussion, if I may.
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead, Councilor Harding, or Cruz.
Ms. Howard, you said something about the parking is going to be in on this. In other words, what was proposed, I suppose about a month ago, that's what we're additionally voting on tonight. That's approving shared within 600 feet and all that.
So the text amendments include the entire code that's being proposed and recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission, which included all the form elements, the parking requirements, the sign requirements, the lighting requirements. All those elements would be then part of this text amendment to the zoning ordinance.
Okay, looking at the proposed, I saw something kind of interesting here. In the minimum reserved parking, a residential unit, you need 1 parking spot for an owner occupied. But if it's a rental, you need 1 per bedroom plus any other additional bedrooms has a spot. Nobody would ever tell you that they're building a rental then, because I would say all my row homes are going to be owner occupied, and you would only need 1 parking spot for that unit, and it may be a 4-bedroom, let's say. Then after a year, it doesn't sell and becomes a rental. How do we prevent it from becoming a rental? Then under the code would need
more parking spots, do we then flow into the street, or what happens there?
So it would be the same as the process is today. We have a different parking requirement when they become rental properties, and that's been reviewed then through the rental ordinance. And of course, somebody that's building a property would have to anticipate the market and have to know, hey, this could be either renter or owner occupied. At that point in time, of course, they have to show that they have provided adequate parking, or they wouldn't be able to rent it. And that's the same as it is today.
Is that through the Board of Rental Housing Appeals?
That is through the rental permit process.
Okay, I have another point here. Denny, if you could put up that page 32 that I gave you on the screen. This is a depiction that came from a while back, and we got the burgundy reddish colored areas there on the visioning, saying this is what new construction could be in this area. And from when I look at this, I see what looks like maybe 2 parking ramps, but you're using up virtually all the surface parking. I see this as an overbuild, with the overflow going way into, like a speaker said earlier, the overflow going into the residential area, and we have no discussion of resident-only parking to limit that. I think this is a big concern.
So maybe I let Mary answer that question, because we took those prototypical sites in the vision plan, and the consultants actually did look at how much space on the lot would be reserved for parking. So some of these buildings that are proposed have parking underground, and
I believe the best way to describe is the illustrative plan that you showed there is from the downtown vision plan, and it is a what-if scenario. This basically was looking at, I think one of the work sessions, someone asked, downtown is all built out, where could you build? Mm-hmm. And this was exploring where there are locations, whether they be surface parking or empty lots, et cetera, where there are potential redevelopment sites. It's very long-term. It did include a couple of different spaces, as you highlighted, that could become parking ramps. Public parking ramps, I believe, is the assumption. It's unlikely, or public-private partnerships. It's very unlikely for someone to, a private developer to build a private ramp that they're going to maintain for their sole private use. It does happen, but it's a very expensive undertaking. So we were tasked with, where are there potential redevelopment sites? There's any one of those could get redeveloped in the relatively near future. I believe a couple of them actually have already been redeveloped over, the past 24 months since the plan was adopted. There were some assumptions that there was a lot of work done on the public parking strategy based on the parking plan, and so a lot of this visioning was falling right on the heels of the parking study. So it's hypothetical, but those are locations where some redevelopment could take place. When we did explore the prototypical sites, we typically figured out how much parking could an individual site hold, whether it be under the building, where it be behind the building, or whether it be small scale and have no parking provided at all, which could happen in downtown today for buildings that are only retail or only office. They're not required to have any parking currently. So
Sure.
We were trying to look at a lot of different scenarios.
But then this depiction here is based on the 1/2 or 3/4 inch parking spots for the residential and no requirement for the commercial. Because if we add all that commercial, every one of those buildings will likely have street front retail of some sort, or restaurant. So you're compounding the people down there. And we don't have mass transit in Cedar Falls. So I think there needs to be more of a discussion on the parking element here, and not put that in with this approval here. That's the elephant in the room in my mind, and I've heard that from a number of people.
Okay. First, I want to get to, is that?
I'm done.
Okay. So Councilmember Harding, you had something earlier?
It's gone.
Okay. Sorry, we'll come
And
back.
by gone, I mean it was answered.
Councilor DeBerra.
Well, kind of getting back, I think, to Mr. Benda's question, when you talked about the parking or the shared parking, was that mandatory or by choice for new development? So is their choice, if they don't want to have shared parking, is not to build there? So as I understand it, you're telling me it's mandatory. Is that right?
As currently drafted, if someone has, there are different categories or tiers, if you want to say. So if they're doing a one-story commercial or retail parking or business building, they would have no parking requirement. As they go up, they would have a requirement to make a portion of their parking publicly available for a portion of days of the week or hours of the day during the week. If they do a small-scale development, they would basically be in the same situation they are today. They would have no requirement for any parking at all.
But if they're building a larger area, they have to give up part of their own property to public use of the parking.
They do not give up their property. They still own their property. They still would have the primary use of their parking for most of the time. They would be asked to give a small portion of their parking to be publicly available for that time. It doesn't mean it has to be for free. They could charge it. They could do it via contract to another property that needs to have parking. There are several different mechanisms to achieve that, but we were tasked with trying to figure out a way to bring more publicly available parking into downtown Cedar Falls market, because that's what we heard repeatedly the city needed, wanted, desired.
Councilmember Harding.
I'm going to follow off of Councilmember DeBur. So with the flexibility of the shared parking, and I use the term flexibility as in what you were just talking about, how you could work an agreement, you could charge for it, you could do this and that. How are those agreements going to be worked out with the developer? Obviously, it'll be in the development plan that you come up with, but what I'm really getting at is, does the developer, let's say they're building an office building, do they get to pick when they would want to share and what they would want to charge? How is that deal going to be worked out?
I don't know if you want to address
Let's say the city wants it at night and the developer wants it at night, well, who wins?
Well, I think, so there's shared parking required for a portion of the residential and a portion of any new upper floor commercial. So the idea is they bring in a development plan, they have their parking, they have to show the city how they're providing the parking that's required. And they have to come up with a plan on how they're going to share it for a portion of the day. And the code requires it to be shared for a minimum of, I can't remember, Mary, do you recall?
12 hours, I believe.
8 hours.
8 hours.
So I think that it's up for them to come up with a plan on how to provide a plan on how to share that. And that would become part of their site plan that's then approved.
Is there any, I guess it's their choice still though, correct? So in other words, would there be any grounds for staff to deny the claim because they didn't like that it was available from 10 p.m. to, 6 a.m.? Does that make sense? How do we get into the approval? Because the rest of it seems pretty clear. It's a checklist, right? You go down the checklist and you check off this box, check, 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 you're approved. So when we get to the shared parking aspect, how do we check that box off and not make it up for decision?
I think it would have to make sense for the uses that are proposed in the building, the spaces that are proposed in the building, and the sharing of the parking. I think it would, so I guess it wouldn't have a real definitive, it would be left up for the developer, and of course they want to have a successful project, and they want to provide the parking that's necessary for their tenants and their uses. So I think we would review their proposal for how they want to share what spaces they want to share and make them publicly available. It has to be in a logical location. So there isn't I think every project will be probably a little different.
Okay, but that's
I don't
fair
know
enough.
if there's anything you want to add to that, Mary?
The
Thanks.
intent is to take the subjectivity out of this. So I think it's a great question, but the checklist should take care, I mean, the intent is to take the subjectivity out.
Yeah, and that's what I was kind of getting at. The checklist, I like the checklist.
Sure.
But I guess I wanted the property owner to make sure that, and obviously, you're right, it has to make sense for both parties, but I was wondering about the flexibility of that check, is I guess what I was getting at, the flexibility of when it would be shared versus when it would not be shared. So.
Councilmember Adair.
Couldn't that, I'm going to jump ahead here a little bit, but couldn't that kind of thing, this is going to take a while to get implemented. We've got 2 more meetings to even approve it. So it's going to take some time, but it would seem to me that, like you said, if a developer has a great plan and they want to develop, they're going to find a way to make the parking work. And so that's my only comment on parking, because this isn't about, it is apparently is about parking for some people. But the last time we met, I said, I think that the title of this activity has been Imagine the Possibilities, and all we do is talk about the potential problems. And I think the purpose of a visioning activity, I've heard the term imagining, visioning, planning, realizing. I think we are on this council, part of what we are responsible for is planning for the future. And I think the plans that we got from you guys demonstrate that people's lives are changing. The lifestyle that we all grew up with is not maybe going to be the same. Already downtown, Mr. Kitchell's buildings are filled with people, and many of them are retired people who go south for the winter. But they're changing their lifestyle. They want to stay in Cedar Falls. We need to give people an opportunity to try to have another option. And I think this provides it. It's not going to happen overnight, and if we implement this and we get bumps in the road, then we work on modifying that. But I don't want to not move this thing forward because there's a possibility of a parking problem. Yeah, there is parking problem downtown already, but it's a great problem to have. And I'd rather work on tweaking that as we go along than continuing to debate what's good for the future of this community. And this kind of development is, I think, how forward-thinking cities are developing. And I've always thought Cedar Falls was a forward-thinking city. So I call the question. If you call a question on an action like this, but
Okay,
I don't know how much more we can talk about parking.
Well, to make sure that we've heard from any council member who wishes to speak on it, is there, Councilor Sires?
Mr. Mayor, I have just a few things to say. When you say that the 70s were backwards or anything, it was actually the innovation of the 1970s that started the parkade. I was down there when Senator Jepsen, and at the time it was Lieutenant Governor Jepsen, inaugurated the parkade. And they had these strange big concrete things on the corners, and it was very different. And our zoning has brought our downtown to what it is today. So to throw away all that zoning and just start over is kind of shocking to me. And I only have a couple things to say. The parking at a half a spot just isn't enough, and shared parking is nothing more than the taking of private property. And I think that's very wrong. Now, my biggest concern is when you bypass planning and zoning. Planning and zoning is made up of our residents and picked by the mayor. And these people are the ones who negotiate all these different things. And they are some of the that's the most important board you could have other than the city council. And with form-based zoning, you do away with planning and zoning. So for those reasons, I just have some issues with it. So I'm also not very satisfied with the contact of the residents that are going to be involved. So that's all I have to say.
And Councilmember Sires?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Dunn.
May I speak?
Please.
Okay. First, to say that we haven't talked about parking over and over and over and over again is completely ridiculous and not true. Second of all, saying that we haven't contacted folks that are involved in this issue is also not true. It's documented that we've contacted them, so they have been contacted. The shared parking, since that's, can we please repeat about how that might affect existing businesses versus new development? I know it's been said, but for the good of everyone, can we repeat it again?
Well, we can tag team on that one. But the whole idea, as Mary has said, is we were tasked with trying to find a way to open up some new parking. Obviously, there's a lot of different strategies we can have for the parking downtown, including all the public parking, how to get more public parking for customers. But one tool that we could have with the zoning is to provide some of that parking that's in a building that's not being used part of the time to be available to the public. So that just adds more parking for maybe the peak times. So say you have an office, you have a building that has offices upstairs, they're not using their parking in the evening, then that parking can be available to restaurant goers downtown. So during those peak times when we do have a shortage of parking, the idea behind the shared parking was just to open up a little bit of a door there to provide a little bit more space as one tool in that toolbox that we want to have for all our downtown parking. You know, there's an awful lot of lots, as we know, in the parking study that are sitting empty in the bank parking lots, the Viking Pump, and we can continue to work on strategies on how to make arrangements for some of those parking areas to be available. And of course, it's up to that individual property owner and making those arrangements. But the zoning was just intended to have one more tool in that toolbox to try to provide a little bit more parking during those peak times when it's needed for customer parking.
And if I could add, Councilmember Dunn, the shared parking for existing businesses, just like all of this zoning, there's no requirement for an existing business to do anything different than what they're doing right now. But if they feel like they need more parking for their customers, then potentially this would be a way for more parking to become available for their customers. Or an existing business who has plenty of parking and doesn't use it on the nights and weekends, it opens the door for them to potentially have another revenue stream that they could make their parking available to someone else. The zoning ordinance itself does not require that the shared parking be made free. It just, the shared parking idea is that it be made accessible. So anyone, I mean, as Karen said, there are a lot of different options for how to move forward, to how to administer it, for how to get individual development plans in place. It would be very unusual for the zoning ordinance to absolutely detail specifically how individual development agreements were going to be finalized. It would be very unusual. It also would tie your zoning up in knots, because that would in effect take away all the flexibility, because you would be saying there is only one way that this is going to happen moving forward. And we were just trying to creatively think about more ways to bring parking online and downtown potentially.
Thank you. And then I just want to make one more comment. It's a downtown community, right? So I think the idea that I understand behind this is very rarely do I go downtown just to go to one business. I go to downtown to enjoy all the things about downtown. The walking around, the seeing my neighbors, the going to different places in close proximity. I think I've made it clear before that I believe probably the majority of folks that don't mind parking a few blocks from where I'm going and enjoying my walk in my downtown area. I also appreciate the thriving downtown and what it does for our surrounding neighborhoods, and I'm quite certain that gives a very positive increase in the value to their home. So I guess I get the gist of this, and I appreciate the vision. To say it hasn't been talked about is not true. It's documented every single time, and you know, there are ways that if you need to get notifications from the city of Cedar Falls, you can sign up for every single email that's ever put out by the city, or you can pick and choose. So that rhetoric of this has just been like all of a sudden crammed down our throat is not true at all. And it's quite disheartening, and I feel like disrespectful to the people who've given their time, including the citizens of our community. So I thank the staff, I thank council previous and present, and I thank the consultants and everyone involved and the citizens who took the time to participate. And even, I appreciate all the input, but the rhetoric that this has just all of a sudden come up and that we've just shoved it down people's throats is simply not true.
Thank you, Councilmember Dunn. I believe we've heard all perspectives here tonight. So if there's no further, then it's been motioned and seconded to pass ordinance amending Chapter 26 zoning and other associated sections of the Code of Ordinances relative to establishing the CDDT Downtown Character District upon its first consideration. This requires a roll call vote.
Four voting aye, 3 voting nay, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Bringing us over to item 7, which we've already had the public hearing for, public comments. And so this would be looking for a motion to pass ordinance amending Section 26118 of the Code of Ordinances by removing all property within the defined boundaries of the Downtown Character District from current zoning districts and placing the same in the CDDT Downtown Character District zoning district upon its first consideration. Is there a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
The motion and seconded, and we separated out the discussion from 6, so if there are additional comments for 7, we certainly can discuss those. Any from council? Like overall, we've caught it well. Yes, Councilmember Cruz?
So you're saying we can slice off parts of this that wouldn't be under this change? Is that what you're saying?
This is item or 7, which is simply discussing the boundaries of the Downtown Character District. So this could be for an amendment.
The discussion or the controversy.
But has it been motioned? Has it been seconded already? I apologize.
I have Miller as motion and Harding as second.
Okay, great. Yes, so we're in discussion. I apologize for that.
Okay. Within the defined boundaries that we're showing here, there's contention on how we develop First and Second Street west of Overman Park. We haven't addressed that, and I don't know how we would address it.
We could do it through a motion to amend.
Well,
if we're going to discuss a change, we would need to have that through a motion process to amend it. Otherwise, we can't just open it up for discussion.
So let me ask then, in this coming year, if we determine that we were, I don't know what word I should use, too aggressive, or we expanded the neighborhood small to include more of that First and Second Street block than we should have, and stifled what could be some commercial development, because we got a state highway there, a 5-lane state highway. And a couple of those blocks could be commercial and make more sense than trying to put residential back right next to a state highway like that. How do you change that? Just make a referral and then do that? Or what?
So it would be done through a rezoning process, the same process that we're going through right now, would be rezoning the property. And I just wanted to clarify that this is the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommended zoning boundaries. That question did come up at the Planning and Zoning Commission, and it's in the decision matrix. There was thought put into whether that should be changed. It was requested by a couple citizens to debate that issue. So the Planning and Zoning Commission did look at that and then made a decision to keep it the way it is. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear, that that was discussed.
Okay. Councilor Harding?
I'm good.
Oh, okay. Thought you had a hand up. So that is a process, and is that typically done by the property owner that they're requesting a rezoning, or could the council make a referral and make that change?
The city council, on their own motion, can refer a rezoning request to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then it would go through the same kind of process. Also can be initiated by a private property owner. So
Okay.
either way, it's allowed by state law to do it either way. Maybe, is that correct, Kevin?
Okay. Does that answer your question, Councilmember Cruz?
Well, yes and no. I mean, we've got, it answered it, but not, I don't know that that's going to solve the problems that I'm hearing in the community.
Okay. So any other comments or questions on 7? Okay, then we've had the public hearing part of that already. So for item 7, it's been motioned and seconded to pass ordinance. I'm not going to read the entire, I guess I have to read the entire thing. Pass an ordinance amending section 26-118 of the Code of Ordinances by removing all property within the defined boundaries of the downtown character district from the current zoning districts and place the same in the CD/DT downtown character zoning district upon its first consideration. It's been motioned and seconded and requires a roll call vote.
4 voting aye, 3 voting nay, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so for both of those items, they do pass the first round or the first consideration. So because it's an ordinance change, it will require 2 additional readings. There wouldn't be a public hearing, as I understand, if I remember right. It's just the discussion as was tonight. So that'll be available for the next council meeting and then the meeting after. So additional time to consider this. So with that, I'll take us over to new business, which is the consent calendar. These items will be acted upon by a voice vote in a single motion without separate discussion unless someone from the council or public requests that a specific item be considered separately. Does any council member request to pull an item from 8 to 13? Seeing none, does anyone from the public wish to pull an item 8 through 13 for discussion? Seeing none in the gallery, any on Zoom?
Nothing in Zoom.
Okay, so I'll read those quickly. Item 8 is receiving and filing resignations from members of boards and commissions. I do want to thank Mr. Clapton and Ms. Sears and Ms. Prito for their services on the boards and commissions. There will be openings, so those will be filled. Those vacancies will be filled. Please get an application in if you're interested. Item 9 is receiving and filing work session minutes of August 16th, 2021. 10 is receiving committee of the whole minutes for August 16th. 11 is receiving and filing departmental monthly reports for July. 12 is approving acknowledgement for settlement agreements. And then 13 is approving applications for beer permits and liquor licenses. Is there a motion to approve these items?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Those do pass as a group then, and takes us to the resolution calendar. These items will be acted upon by a roll call vote on a single motion without separate discussion, unless someone from the council or public requests that a specific item be considered separately. Does any council member wish to pull an item 14 through 29 for discussion? Okay, seeing none, does anyone from the public wish to pull an item from 14 to 29 for discussion? Seeing none in the gallery, any on Zoom?
Nothing in Zoom.
Okay, so I will quickly read these as well. 14 is a resolution approving and adopting amendments to the City Emergency Operations Plan. 15 is a resolution approving and adopting meeting protocol changes for COVID-19 pandemic. 16 is a resolution designating the Director of Finance and Business Operations as the authorized representative for American Rescue Plan Act funds. 17 is a resolution approving and authorizing transfer of funds from the general fund to the emergency reserve and capital projects funds. 18 is a resolution approving and authorizing execution of an account service agreement for background checks. 19 is a resolution approving and authorizing execution of a cooperative agreement with the Iowa Civil Rights Commission for 2022. 20 is a resolution approving and authorizing execution of a facilities agreement with Northeast Iowa Agency on Aging relative to the use of the community center. We thank them for their service. 21 is a resolution approving and authorizing expenditure of funds for the purchase of cameras for the transfer station and public works facilities. 22 is a resolution approving and authorizing execution of a facility use agreement with the Red Cross for the use of the fitness center as a shelter during a disaster emergency. 23 is a resolution approving a mixed-use residential zoning district site plan for a medical clinic addition at 226 Bluebell Road. 24 is a resolution approving Lot 17 Green Acres minor subdivision plat. 25 is a resolution approving and accepting the contract and bond for Blacktop Service Company for the 2021 Seal Coat project. And then 26 is a resolution approving and authorizing execution of a stormwater agreement in Wild Horse Ridge. 27 is a resolution approving an amendment to the preliminary plat of Wild Horse Ridge. 28 is a resolution receiving and filing and setting September 20th, 2021 as the date for a public hearing on proposed plans, specifications, form of contract, and estimate of cost for the 2021 street patching project. And finally, 29 is a resolution receiving and filing and setting September 20th, 2021 as the date for a public hearing on proposed plans, specifications, form of contract, and estimate of costs for the recreational river area and riverbank improvements project. Is there a motion to approve these items?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and seconded, and requires a roll call vote.
All voting aye, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Then over to bills and claims. Is there a motion to approve bills and claims of September 7th?
So moved.
Motion and seconded. Any council discussion? Public discussion? Seeing none? None on Zoom? Okay, so it's been motion and seconded and requires a roll call vote.
All voting aye, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Do we have any council referrals tonight? Didn't see it in the package, so any updates from council? Seeing none there either. And then over to staff updates. We didn't have any this morning, but do you have any you want to add in, Mr. Gaines?
No, sir.
Okay, well, that part went really fast. So with that, I do want to, before we adjourn, I do want to thank everybody for a great discussion, difficult topic, dealing with the zoning changes. There will be additional time for discussion. I want to thank you and our students, for coming in tonight, joining us for this spirited debate. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
The motion is seconded. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.